السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. أما بعد. So before we begin, we should always try to renew our intention as to why we're here. We're here to learn our deen. We're here to learn our religion, not just for the sake of knowing it, but for the sake of practicing it. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make our hearts such that when we learn something and we know that it is commanded on us to practice, that we begin to practice that immediately. We also ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to teach us that which is going to benefit us and to allow us to benefit from that which He's already taught us. Ameen. So today's class, this class is going to be Islamic Law 2, which is going to be covering social dealings. There's really no other way to classify that. It's not only social dealings, but I'm going to explain why this class is called social dealings. In the beginning of this class, we're going to be covering the introduction that we had the previous quarter in some level of detail, but just kind of an overview from the previous class on Islamic law. How many of you actually attended the previous class and passed it? Okay, so alhamdulillah. So those of you who are familiar, it's going to be a little bit review for you, but I'm going to be adding some things here. So, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. The Islamic way of life, we know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He teaches us how to live our lives in addition to having to believe in certain things. So, Islam is not just about what you believe and what you think about Allah and how you worship Allah, but it's an entire program of life on how we should be directing our behavior in all aspects of life. So that's really important to understand. It implies in the individual level as well as the social level in terms of how we're supposed to be structuring our society. And this, of course, is a blessing from Allah, because the more guidance we have from Allah, the better it is for us. Rather than looking at it from the other perspective, where we have to have all these rules and everything, all these rules are for our benefit, for our guidance. So we should be happy about that, and we should keep that in mind. If you were to take the Sharia, meaning the Islamic law, all the things that Allah has told us to do, not to believe but to do, we could classify them into the following categories. Acts of worship, or ibadat. This is what we covered in the previous class. Muslim scholars have classified the ibadat, or the acts of worship, as purification, prayer, fasting, zakah, and hajj. And we did everything except hajj in the previous class. That is because usually these acts are between you and your Creator. And there's not too much of a social element. Although prayer has a social element, zakah has a social element to it, fasting also has some social, Ramadan has a social element to it. But primarily they've been classified for the sake of division, or for the sake of categorization, into acts of worship. But there's more than that. See, some Muslims, they think that fasting is, Islam is just about believing in Allah, praying, fasting, giving zakah, going for hajj once in your life, or sometimes whenever you feel like it, and that's it. And there's nothing else. That's all Islam is. But Islam is much more than that. Even when it comes to the Sharia, when it comes to what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants us to do. So among the other categorizations are the family matters, what's known as ahwal shakhsiyya. So family matters in terms of marriage, divorce, how you get married, methods of divorce, inheritance, when somebody dies, how it's distributed to their family members, naming children, performing the sacrifice, the aqiqah for them. All of these things come under this category. Economic transactions, or mu'amalat. Mu'amalat means those transactions which you deal with other people. Not just economic transactions, but even things which we don't consider to be economic, in terms of you loaning something to somebody else and they don't give it back to you in time. What happens? Or somebody gives you collateral. Say, you know what, you can keep my book until I, give you your book back. And all of a sudden they lose their book. Now they lose that book of yours while it was in their possession. What happens? Is it okay if they just say, I'm really, really, really sorry? Is that sufficient, or do they need to replace and buy you another book? What if the book was used? Does the value go down, or do you have to have the value of the brand new book? All of these things are considered mu'amalat, economic transactions, and Islam has given us guidance in that field. Politics and governance. Ahkam sultaniya. How do you administer a government? How do you administer a state? What are the rules? What are the regulations? Warfare. How do you deal with prisoners of war? Can you waterboard them? Can you torture them? What do you do with them? Right? So these type of things. And food and clothing. What kind of food you can eat, which we're going to be covering today. What food you cannot eat. And clothing, what type of clothing you can wear, you can't wear, you should avoid, all of these things. And lastly, manners and etiquettes, or akhlaq. Meaning things which are niceties. They're recommended things you should be doing. Generally, this is not the class for akhlaq. We covered a lot of these things in our class on hadith, on prophetic wisdom. But we will be covering sometimes these things as well. But it's actually nicer and better to take the category of akhlaq and put it into a separate category and teach it independently. Because it's not about rules and laws and this will break this and this will break that. It's something, just general behavior that people should have anyways in the first place. We try to separate it as a topic. We covered it in Tazkiyah, in the spirituality course, as well as in the prophetic wisdom course, and we'll be covering it some more in other courses. Every Muslim should know the basics of all of these things. This is very important because most Muslims don't know the general things. Just to give you an example, let's take ahwal shakhsiyya, family matters. Majority of Muslims, I would say, or majority of cases that at least I get, or Shaykh Faqih gets, or other imams get, almost all the divorces take place completely against the Sharia, while people assume that they're following the Sharia. They're actually following Islamically. So I did it Islamically. I told her, you're divorced 3 times. And I added 5 more just, in case she didn't get the point. This is not something that's allowed in the first place. So they don't know that. So it's something important, at least at the level of practicality, that people need to learn. Economic transactions, the same thing. Somebody's investing in the stock market, and all of a sudden they found out, oh, you know what, I shorted this stock. Well, you're not allowed to short a stock for reasons which we're going to be discussing. But if you don't know that and you don't realize what you're doing, there's going to be problems. Politics and governance may not be as relevant in terms of practicality today in our society, but we get questions on this all the time. Why do you cut off that guy's hand? What's the reason for that? Or what are the restrictions? What are the conditions? All of that. Food and clothing, the most commonly discussed topic among Muslims. And the reason why it's so commonly discussed is because it's apparent. It's visible on a day-to-day basis. So people make it into debates and disputes and discussions because you can see the person in front of you. Is he eating McDonald's or he's not? Right? Is he wearing this type of clothing or he's not? So because it's apparent, people put a lot of emphasis on this because you can see it. Whereas divorce takes place over a period of a few minutes. And the whole court process, of course, takes sometimes years. But economic transactions, the actual transaction takes place in a matter of seconds. So I think this is probably the real reason why people put so much emphasis on food and clothing. It just happens to be apparent because it lasts for a longer period of time. You can see what clothes I'm wearing, I can see what clothes you're wearing. And you can see what kind of food or where did I buy my food from, and I can see where you bought your food from. That's why. If these other things were longer, drawn out, and they were so apparent and transparent, we would be debating them all day long as well. But we're not, because they're not so apparent. So every Muslim should know the basics. Okay? Sharia versus fiqh. That's a very important topic. And if you haven't covered it already, I really recommend that you get the book and you read the introduction. This is all from the introduction of that book. This is a very important point to understand, especially when we talk about the other aspects, the social dealings and the food and clothing and all of that. Sharia refers to what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually intended. And fiqh refers to the scholars or human understanding of what the Sharia is. So there will never be 2 different opinions about Sharia. It is the way Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said it is. But fiqh is where we approach the Sharia. There will be differences of opinion. There must be, Allah has allowed that there will be differences of opinion, and some of those differences of opinion are legitimate. And therefore, they should not be made into a matter of argumentation or polemics in the Muslim community. Particularly, like I mentioned in the last class, particularly when they refer to your own personal acts of worship. So whether you hold your hands like this in prayer, or you hold your hands a little bit lower, or you grasp your hands a little bit like this is not a huge deal. Although again, it's apparent, so people can see you doing it. If you do it at home, no one can see you. But if you do it in the masjid, people can see you. It should not be made into such a big deal, because they're acceptable differences of opinions. When it comes to some of these things which we're going to be talking about, a lot of them are more society-based. Meaning, you know what? Well, you think this food is halal, it's okay, and I think this food is not halal. The question is, are we going to serve your food or your food in the masjid to the entire community? Now it's not a personal issue anymore. Now it's a community issue. And you need to research, you need to discuss with scholars, you need to figure out something which will work for the community, because the community is going to be defined based upon the position that you're taking. Even though both of them, in one sense, is legitimate. You know, Allah inshallah is going to reward the people because both of them are scholarly opinions, as long as they're scholarly opinions. So this is important to understand from the beginning. So the methodology we're going to be covering, there's 4 aspects of law. So for those of you who didn't understand or who weren't here in the previous class, there's 4 things that people usually study when they're studying this subject. One of them is the ruling on a specific issue. Can you eat chicken that fell off a cliff and died, and then somebody came and slaughtered it? Yes or no? That's the ruling. So the yes or no, halal, haram, mubah, it's allowed, it's permissible, it's recommended, it's disliked. That's the ruling on a particular issue. The second is the evidence for the ruling. Well, where's the evidence? Is there a verse of the Quran that talks about that? So, well, where's the verse? And what is the verse actually trying to tell us? Right? About an animal that fell off a cliff, for example. There's a verse in the Quran about that. So, there's evidence for a ruling as well. Legitimate differences of opinions. So then there's the comparative fiqh aspect, where you say, okay, well, Imam Abu Hanifa said this, Imam Shafi'i said this, Imam Abu Hanifa's students differed with him and said this, Imam Ahmad said this, Shaykh Ibn Taymiyyah said this, and modern day scholar of my local masjid said this, and the Grand Mufti of Saudi Arabia said this. This is different opinions, and obviously you want to be discussing legitimate difference of opinions. You don't say, well, you know, my friend who doesn't really come to the masjid, he told me this. That's not something obviously we're going to really be discussing, because his opinion is not that important, because it's not grounded. Number 4 is the reason or the wisdom behind the action. So just taking the example of the chicken that fell off a cliff and died. Okay, so somebody came 30 seconds later and slaughtered it. What's the problem? You know, what's the reason? What's the wisdom behind that? Well, the blood didn't flow out. Okay, well, there's a wisdom behind that. Well, why does blood need to flow out of the animal before we're allowed to eat a particular animal? There's some wisdom, or maybe there's a reason why we can figure out, why did Allah prohibit us to eat this type of meat? There must be some wisdom or some reason. So you don't need to know the wisdom to stay away from it, but when you know it, it kind of gives you this sense of comfort. You say, well, that makes sense, you know, and then you can tell other people, hey, you probably shouldn't be eating that either because of this and this reason. So these are the 4 things that people generally study when they're studying this subject. Because we want to cover so many topics in one short class, we're going to only focus on number 1 and number 4. And in this class, I will be mentioning a little bit more of number 3. Few different opinions here and there on some issues, particularly issues which have become really hot in the Muslim community. But otherwise, the focus is going to be on 1 and 4, because you need number 1 to be a Muslim and to just practice. That's what Islam is about, first and foremost. You can sit there and go through all the evidence and debate back and forth and see, oh, look how the scholars differed, and look at the varying opinions and all that. It's so interesting. Yes, it's very interesting. But it doesn't mean that you're going to be able to move on, learn everything, and then practice it in your life. So the first and foremost thing that someone should focus on is knowing what is right and what is wrong, and do that. Just act upon it. And number 4, because people, especially today, we have this inclination, that we would like to know the reasoning behind things and understand the wisdom and everything. So we'll try and focus a little bit more on those things, inshallah. So we're going to be focusing on practicality. So we're going to, for example, there are a lot of issues in a lot of books of Islamic law. If you take a course in some other place, you may find all these issues coming up. You say, well, you didn't cover those issues in class. They were really interesting. What if, there's a mouse and the mouse falls into your jar of ghee, clarified butter? How do you take out the mouse and how much do you have to remove? You can get into details. It becomes very interesting. But it's almost likely you're not going to encounter that scenario. Very unlikely as an urban Muslim living in America are you likely to encounter a scenario like that. So we're going to focus on the real scenarios. Like there's been a debate among Muslim scholars on whether or not you're allowed to eat the sea creature that's also a human. Do you know what I'm referring to? Mermaids, right? So there's been a debate. Are you allowed to eat the mermaid or are you not? Because the mermaid is technically a sea creature. But at the same time, it's part human. You're allowed to eat the mermaid, you're not allowed to eat the mermaid. Yeah? And there's a lot of pages and pages that have been written. You can write a whole master's thesis on this. And I think I know someone who's done it actually. But mermaids don't exist. I'm sorry to break it. Sorry to break it to you. Very sorry to burst the bubble. Mermaids don't actually exist. And in case they did, then we can start worrying about that, right? Otherwise, there's no point in discussing this. So we're going to try and focus on practicality, particularly for Muslims who live in America. Methodology. So the methodology which we're going to be using, there's three. One of them is so the methodology we're going to use is we're going to be following one school of thought as a foundational school. That's what we did last class as well. This one is going to be a little bit more open. So it's not going to be as based in one school only. The reason for that is even scholars who generally insist, even oftentimes who adamantly insist on following one school, they usually confine that opinion to the ibadat or the acts of worship. And when it comes to social dealings, they tend to be a lot more lax in accepting opinions from other schools. So we're going to be using that methodology that's been laid out in the book in some more detail. So I'm not going to go through it in too much detail. This is just a kind of recap, or this is kind of just good to know. But none of this is going to be on your test or anything like that, because it's not part of this class in particular. This is important to know though. What do you do when you have a question and you went and you asked one person and then they gave you an answer, and then you went and you asked another person and they gave you a different answer? People get confused then. So, I don't know what to do. It doesn't make sense. What should I do? So what do you do in that case? What you do is you should always ask a trustworthy, knowledgeable person who's generally considered to be a scholar, or even someone who's just a student of knowledge, someone who knows, when you don't know something. Right? When you don't know something. Once you ask them, all right, you use your best judgment. You have to decide who you're asking. You don't just ask some random guy you just see in the masjid. Oh, brother, mashallah, you prayed with us. Can I ask you 5 very important questions that have been bothering me for a long time? You're not going to do that. You're going to find people who have some kind of qualification or they've studied something. All right, so you need to find them. Once you get an answer, once you trust the person and then you ask them, you should only be asking people you trust, first of all. Once you trust them, you ask them, they give you an answer, you should follow that answer that they've given you, and you should stick to it, unless. And so the reason why I'm saying this is because a lot of people, they go ask one scholar, oh, that's not what I was looking for, So I'm not allowed to eat the starburst? Okay. I want to go and ask somebody else. You go and ask somebody else? Oh, he says it's disliked. You should try to avoid it, but it's not prohibited. That's a little bit nicer. But I'm sure I can find somebody else. Let me go and ask somebody else. You're not supposed to do that, because when you ask the first person in the first place, it's because you trusted their judgment. Now you're just playing around and making your own decisions. So when you ask one person, only ask people who you trust in the first place. When they give you an answer, just follow it. Don't start going and say, well, I want to know all the different opinions so that I can go and pick my own and choose my own, and I will decide a different opinion from you, even though I consider you to be an expert and I don't know anything and I came and asked you. That doesn't make sense, right? You don't go to your doctor and say, well, you know what, doctor? I know you're prescribing me this medicine, but have you ever heard of anybody in the whole world who's prescribed other medicines in the past or anything like that? He said, well, the Greeks, they used to use this kind of strange medicine, and the Romans, they used to, drink some kind of urine or something like that. And he said, thank you, doctor, that's what I needed to hear. I'm going to go and pick one of them for myself and not listen to what you have to say. That's not the right way to do things. But there are some times where you can continue to ask other people. So, if you need more information and you're not able to reach the first scholar or the first person that you asked, you can obviously go and ask another one. That's a legitimate reason for asking. You're messaging them, they're not answering. You're emailing them, they're not answering. You can't ask the same person that you trust, so you go and ask somebody else. That's a good reason. Second reason is, the answer seems strange, right? Like something very strange. You say, okay, I did trust this guy, I didn't know him that well, but he gave me a very weird answer. He said something like, he told me not to get fillings in my teeth, for example. He said, you know what, don't get fillings in your teeth, because if you get a filling in your tooth, then when you're performing the bath, the ghusl, water has to reach in your mouth everywhere, and the water is not getting into your teeth, therefore your prayers will not be counted. You say, so what do I do? So you have to pull out your teeth. Muslims should not be getting their teeth filled. Okay? This is actually a fatwa. There's a scholar who's given this opinion, and khair, whatever the opinion is. But if it sounds strange, you say, I have to get all my teeth pulled out and I can't get fillings? It seems a little bit strange. Let me go and double check with somebody else. So yeah, this is a good reason to go and double check with somebody else. And in my opinion, this is a very strange fatwa, so you should not be following it anyways. But getting cavities filled would be fine. If the answer seems poorly researched, but you still respect the person. So for example, they say, well, I was taught in my school this and this. You say, well, you're, mashallah, you have knowledge, but it looks like you didn't really research this that well. You don't really seem to be an expert in this field. Maybe I'm going to go ask someone else who's researched it in detail, who knows it a little bit better, who's really, reflected on the issue, because you feel more confident in the other person. That's a good reason, that's a legitimate reason to go and ask somebody else. And lastly, if the questioner has lost confidence in that scholar, so now you don't trust that scholar anymore, whether it's due to their answer or it's due to some other reason. All of a sudden you ask them, can I eat this? And they say, yeah, you can eat that, it's going to be fine. And then all of a sudden you see that same person, hopefully he's not a scholar, but somebody, you see that person, dancing in a nightclub or something like that. And you know for a fact that they're doing something wrong, and you say, that's ridiculous. This person, how can I trust them now? How can I trust their knowledge now when you can't really trust their character? So now you say, well, now I want to go and ask somebody else, because I can't be certain whether or not what they were giving me was accurate. So that's a good reason to go and ask somebody else. Outside of these reasons and maybe a few others, there's not really a necessity to go and ask other people. You just take the answer as long as it seems like a good Islamic answer, and you ask the right person or person who's qualified, just act upon it and follow that, rather than going around and searching for an answer. Most people, or a lot of people you can say, they search for the easiest answer, and that's not the best thing to do. Some people actually go and search for the hardest answer, the most difficult answer, because they feel that there's more piety involved in that. That's also not the way to go about it. You see, the answer should be given based upon what is considered fiqh-wise to be closest to the actual meaning of the Sharia, what Allah really intended. That's what you should be aiming for, not for the easiest or the hardest. So that's something where you have to use your judgment and you have to be sincere about it. So optimal method, so we're going to skip that. So general rules. So when we talk about anything in this class, we're going to be talking about 5 categories of which actions fall into. One of them is obligatory, what we call fard or wajib. And I'm combining the two together. The second is what's recommended. Sunnah or nafil or adab or mustahab, all in the same category. Something which is recommended. Right? Something which is permissible or mubah. Something which is disliked, what's known as makruh. And something which is prohibited, that's haram. When you do something that's obligatory, you have to do it as a Muslim. If you don't do it, you will be sinful. Something that's prohibited, if you do it, you will be sinful. And if you avoid it and you have temptation, you get reward for avoiding it. And likewise, for doing what's obligatory, you get reward as well, in addition to avoiding sin. Recommended and disliked. What's recommended, if you do it, you're getting reward from Allah. But if you avoid it, you're not going to be getting any sin. What's disliked, you should try to avoid it. And if you avoid it, inshallah Allah will reward you as well. But if you do it, you're not going to get any sin for doing something that's disliked. And what's permissible, meaning it's just, there's no sin and there's no reward. So you drinking water, for example, with no other intention involved, it's permissible, you can do that. You sitting on a chair in this classroom, or you sitting on the floor in this classroom, or you standing up in the back. It's permissible. Whichever one you do, you're not going to get any sin for doing that, nor are you going to get any reward for doing one over the other. So these are things which are permissible. And in situations of difficulty, now this is important actually. Whenever you encounter some really difficult circumstance or an exceptional situation, you should consult a scholar because there are exceptions to the rule. Here's a hypothetical example. If you happen to be in the middle of a desert or you're stuck on a mountain or something like that, and there's no food to eat, right? And the only thing you find happens to be some pork or something like that, and somehow you have phone reception. You text message a scholar and you figure out, well, what can I do with this? Can I eat this? Can I not eat that? So in these when there's exceptional circumstances, you broke your leg, for example, and you can't stand during prayer. What do you do in that case? So exceptional circumstances does dictate exceptions, which is an appendix explained in the book, in Appendix 1 or Appendix 2. Difference of opinion. So just know that there are legitimate differences of opinion, and Allah has allowed that as a mercy from Him. Okay, and we talked about how to deal with differences of opinion in the society in which we live. It's good to know, and it's important to not be extreme. Don't always think that everyone else is wrong and you're always right. It's important to research, important to understand what other people are doing. I guess this is pretty good. There's two extremes that people deal with differences of opinion in our society. One of them is to assume that their opinion is always right, and they're always trying to correct everybody else. So you know what? Your feet, no, your feet are not positioned correctly. Your hands, no, you're holding it wrong. It should be this way. And then, you're doing this wrong, you're doing that wrong. The thing is, if the other person is ignorant, they've never been taught, that's different. But if you only know one opinion, and there's more than one opinion on that issue, you may be trying to correct somebody else who's following a correct, legitimate opinion, but you think that only your opinion is correct. This is due to your ignorance and your lack of knowledge. So this is one extreme that people fall into. The second extreme is relativism, like just being passive. Say, people could do whatever they want. They want to eat, bacon from pork. It's not my problem. I shouldn't have to tell them what they're doing is wrong. And someone is dressing inappropriately. Well, that's not that's between them and Allah. I have no right to get involved in that. No, you do. You do. If you know that for sure they're doing something wrong, it's your responsibility, as well as, it's your brother or your sister. If they were doing something wrong, you would want to correct them. You'd want to help them to see what's right. And then if they choose to do it or not, then that's their decision. But the knowledge or pointing out what's happening or trying to convince them is something there. So these are two extremes. We should be in between these two extremes. Okay, so let's start with food and drink now. Alhamdulillah, all food has been created for us by Allah to survive in this world, because Allah created our body dependent on food and drink. We have to have that in order for us to survive. So Allah created food, all the different things that we see around us, for a reason. One of them is for us to survive. The second is for us to enjoy as well. So food is not only about survival, it's actually a blessing from Allah in that we're going to survive, and that a lot of it tastes good as well. Right? Depending on your circumstances and your taste buds and how much, high fructose corn syrup has corrupted your taste and all of that. Just depending on that, it's tasty as well as enjoyable. So even the Prophet ﷺ, peace be upon him, even he used to love certain types of food. He used to love a certain type of meat, a certain cut of meat. Right? Does anyone know what it was? Shoulder. Right? And he used to like other types of sweet dishes as well. So he used to enjoy certain types of food as well. It's a blessing, right, that we get this type of food. However, despite all of that's been created, there's a few things which have been prohibited for us. Few things. And if you actually count how many things, you just look at everything in creation. How many things are actually we're allowed to eat, compared to how many things intrinsically we're not allowed to eat? What ratio are we looking at? What ratio? Halal to haram ratio in terms of what exists if we were to go and grab something, whatever it is. It's like 1 or 2%. Really, it's very, very minuscule in terms of edible food that generally people eat. So that means the majority of things are halal. Now, if we're going to go and run after, no, I want that 1%. I want to taste that 1 or 2% food. I want to have everything. I'm not satisfied with the other 99% that's been given to me. So Allah has prohibited just a few things actually. And the reason why He's prohibited them might be one of two things. They're harmful for us. Harmful meaning harmful physically, or it can mean harmful spiritually. So sometimes the food can affect our behavior, or it can affect our health, our physical health as well. And the second or category is that it may be harmful for us individually, or maybe it's not harmful individually, but on a societal level, collectively, it's harmful. Therefore, it could be prohibited for that reason as well. Okay? Now, these prohibitions that Allah has set for us, they should not be taken lightly. We should not just take them as, it's just food, Allah created everything. The thing is, it should be taken very seriously because it has an effect on your religion, it has an effect on the way you deal with Allah, it has an effect on the fact that you're getting sin. And a great example of that, just as an example of food. A lot of people say, why are you so concerned about food? All you guys talk about is food this, food that. It's not a big deal, it's just some food, just eat it. No. Even Prophet Adam, the first human being, he was kicked out of paradise for what sin? For eating something which was prohibited for him. And because of that, he was kicked out of the garden. Right? He was kicked out of paradise. So even this is a test from Allah. Partly it's a test and partly it's for our own good. But if we're going to fail that kind of test, we should be thinking about the seriousness of this. So let's begin with some categories. What food and drink is prohibited? We're going to be talking about these categories. These are all the categories of food and drink that are prohibited for us. And the list is pretty much comprehensive, which means that anything which doesn't fall in one of these categories is lawful. So everything else you just take, you find some animal, you take like a buffalo for example. You put it in this list of categories which we're going to go into detail. Does it fall into any of these categories? If it doesn't, then it's allowed for you to go ahead and eat. Okay? So we're going to be covering. We'll start with land animals. Land animals. Among the land animals, so what's a land animal? An animal that lives on land and walks around and everything. So the first land animal that's prohibited for us is swine, pig. That refers to all parts of the pig. So all parts of the pig is forbidden for us. Okay? So let's take a look at some of the reasons. One of the reasons, probably, Allah is not specifying the details, but probably one of the reasons is because it's a very filthy animal. Okay, the pig is considered to be a very filthy animal. In fact, it's one of the filthiest animals in existence. In case you didn't know, the pig actually eats its own feces, or has the potential or the craving to eat its own feces. Now you hear that Muslims talking about it all the time and say, oh, it even eats its own feces. And some people will come and say, come on, that's ridiculous. Why are you coming up with this? That's some chain mail that you received or something like that. Well, there's actually a lot of good evidence to that. There's actually something called pig toilets. Okay, anyone heard of pig toilets before? Not if you didn't read the notes. Anyone heard of pig toilets? There are pig toilets. They still exist in India, in Goa in particular. And they existed throughout India and throughout China in the past. What a pig toilet basically is imagine primitive style toilet where you go to the bathroom, you sit down and you're going to the bathroom and it's dropping down, it's dropping down into a sewer. But in that sewer area, there's a bunch of pigs and they're just waiting for their meal. And literally, and there's actually people from the United Nations who are arguing that this is something that we should actually be spreading a little bit more because it's very, not hygienic, but it just makes life easier. So you don't need to worry about disposal because the pigs are disposing of it for you. So you don't need to worry about, landfills and, too much waste building up. Other people in the United Nations are concerned because the people who live in these areas consume some of those pigs, and they get several diseases and problems, and other than that, more apparent than other people who consume other types of pigs. So this is not, you can research it. This is a clear fact. This is what pigs do, and they have this ability. So possibly one of the reasons is because it's filthy, physically as well as spiritually, in terms of the habit that manifests, even if they're taken care of. So pigs actually carry many health risks. Let's take a few examples of them. It says pigs can harbor a range of parasites and diseases that can be transmitted to humans. Among them are trichinosis. Anyone know what trichinosis is? Some of you are familiar with it. Okay, it's one of them. Taenia solium, cysticercosis, and brucellosis. Also, they're known to host large concentrations of parasitic ascarid worms in their digestive tract. So this happened to a lot of people. This is particularly when the meat is not cooked well, or they're not taken well care of, or whatever it is. But Islam has prohibited us these animals because generally they're going to be harmful. Even if you say that, well, if the pig is filthy, what we're going to do is we're going to grow one in a laboratory. And we're not going to even allow it to eat anything. We're going to inject it with, glucose. It's going to just get the nutrients that it needs, the bare minimum. And it's going to be kept in a hygienic laboratory the entire time. And then we're going to go and slaughter it and take a piece of it. Then in that case, are we allowed to eat it because the filthiness is not there? The thing is, still, we're not allowed to eat it. Okay. Now, what is the reason? So what's the reason behind it? The reason is because the wisdom behind not eating it was generally the fact that it's filthy. But filthy in what aspects? These are only some of the aspects that we figured out with modern research. There are other aspects. There are behavioral aspects. There are intrinsic aspects. And there are spiritual aspects. Which it doesn't matter what you do to somebody physically, there's still spiritual aspects. So we cannot know all the aspects. And to be honest, it's just one animal out of all the other animals that are land animals that we can eat. So it's really not such a big deal. Lastly, it's mentioned in the Bible as well. Because a lot of people, they say, I don't understand why you don't eat pig and everything. It's a good, nice topic of conversation that you could bring up. The Old Testament, Leviticus chapter 11, verses 7 to 8. Make for a nice, cup of coffee, tea conversation. Next is carnivorous animals that hunt with fangs or claws. So you have any type of animals which are carnivores, and if they hunt with their fangs or their claws, there's a few exceptions, but they're still carnivores. These animals are prohibited for us as well. Among the reasons could also be due to the health risks which are associated with animals that eat carrion, that eat meat and all of these things. There are also other health risks. You can read the notes. It's very similar to the pig. And also another reason could be that they eat carrion, which is dead meat, which we're going to talk about. So they eat dead meat as well, and we're not allowed to eat dead meat. If the animal is eating the dead meat, and then you go and eat that animal, there's possibly some kind of chain or some kind of link. Okay, so these are things to know. Also, eating wild animals has a psycho-spiritual effect on the behavior of a person. Because they're wild animal, they're carnivorous and all of that. They say you are what you eat and all of that. They say that there's some truth to that. So there could be some truth to that as well. So that could be another one of the reasons. Okay, so among the animals, we're talking about carnivorous animals. What are we talking about? Who can name some? Tiger, lion, dog, bear, hyena, the fast one, cheetah, bears, leopards, right? All of these type of things. Okay. The next is birds. So those are land animals. Out of the land animals that you're not allowed to eat are these, swine and carnivorous animals. So what kind of land animals are we allowed to eat? Let's just name some of them. Camel, goat, buffalo, sheep, horse, rabbit, cow, zebra, deer, antelope, gazelle, right? You can just keep on going, right? So there's a lot. Elephant as well. So there's a difference of opinion. Badgers, these type of things. So these are, there's a lot of alternative options there. So the one exception which I didn't put in the slide was donkey. So donkey is one more that the Prophet ﷺ has specifically prohibited, and that refers to domesticated donkeys and not wild donkeys. Okay? Now how many of you, anyone ever eaten donkey? Does anyone know anyone who's ever eaten donkey? Is there any areas, Malaysia, do they eat donkeys? Nobody eats donkeys. They shouldn't be in Malaysia, right? So generally, because it's so rare, I've never heard of anyone eating a donkey actually. So because it's rare, I just left it out. But yeah, donkey is one more thing in the list, okay, that I just didn't put in there. Only domesticated donkey, but the majority of donkeys are domesticated. The wild donkeys are quite rare actually. Wild donkeys are okay to eat. Yes. Okay. I don't anticipate anyone ever finding either a domesticated or wild donkey, but in case you do, let me know so I can adjust in the next class, inshallah. Alright, so birds. The birds that are not allowed. Carnivorous birds which hunt with their talons. Or even there's another bird which doesn't hunt, but it's still a carnivorous bird. So those are not allowed. Those are not okay to eat. So out of all the birds that you can eat, just the carnivore ones, the ones that feed on other animals, are not allowed to eat. The reason why is probably the same reason for the carnivorous land animals, right? Due health risks and all of that. So it's just listed one more time. Their eggs, however, are okay to eat. So you can eat an eagle egg, which I doubt you're probably going to get access to one. But if you were to, the egg is fine. So it's the meat itself or the animal itself that you're not allowed to eat. So what are some examples of carnivorous birds? Bat, eagle, falcon, crow. Certain types of crows. There's different types of crows. Vulture, yes. Okay, bat, yeah, said bats as well, right? So these are all birds. What kind of birds are we allowed to eat? Duck, quail, parrots, sparrow, goose, ostrich, dove, pigeon, rooster, chicken, peacock, etc. Quail. We don't consider, they're not birds. They're not birds. Yeah. Ostrich, yeah, ostrich. I've had ostrich before. Anyone else had ostrich? It's very good, man. South Africans, jerky. They make. No, yeah, turkey as well. Ostrich jerky they make. Good stuff. It's called biltong. Anyways, so there's a lot of stuff that we can eat. So these are birds. All the other birds we can eat except these two, one category. Sea creatures. So creatures in the sea are all allowed, according to the majority of scholars. Okay, according to the majority of scholars, they're all allowed. There's a school of thought, the Hanafi school of thought says that only fish are allowed. Fish in the broadest sense of the category. So in the Hanafi school, fish applies to fish as we know them. The eel also classifies as a fish. Shark classifies as a fish. Whales classify as fish. And according to a lot of modern day scholars, as well as some classical scholars, shrimp also classifies as fish, according to the Arabic dictionary. Although not according to biology. Crab, no. Okay? So I'll take more questions on that. I'm just kind of side noting that. So otherwise, according to other schools, all sea creatures are allowed and they do not need to be slaughtered in a specific way. Okay, so we're going to talk about slaughter later, but sea creatures are fine across the board. So whatever you find in the sea, it's all good to go. Clams and oysters and dolphins and lobsters and eels and squid and like the super squids and all the other weird, all the strange stuff. What else? Mermaids, there's a difference of opinion. So I would go with the safe opinion on the mermaids. So that's the reason why they had the whole debate about mermaids anyways. So they do not need to be slaughtered in a specific way. However, animals that live both in the sea as well as on land, so they go back and forth, like seals, crocodiles, frogs, some turtles, crabs as well, penguins. All right, they are cute, yes. Is that what you said? Okay, yeah, mashallah. So those kind of animals which live on the sea, and there's difference of opinion on whether or not they're allowed to be eaten if they're not slaughtered correctly. So we're gonna talk about slaughtering, whether they classify as land animals or they classify as sea animals. So there's a difference of opinion. So I would say just to avoid the difference of opinion, it's recommended whenever you can to slaughter it when possible. Seals, penguins, crocodiles, those type of animals, there's difference of opinion on that. Anybody eaten a seal before? Yes? You've eaten seal? MashaAllah. Slaughtered or no slaughtered? You don't know? Okay. Anyone eaten penguin before? No? Crocodile? No? How about, no, shark? Yeah. Alligator? No, they don't go on land, right? So, okay. There's also difference of opinion on that. But generally, what are crocodiles generally eating? Actually, I don't even know. I didn't look into it, man. They eat frogs. They eat fish. Fish. They eat fish. Fish. Crocodile. No, that's exceptional rule. They're not coming out on land to like take a zebra or something, are they? I don't know. You can research it. Before you eat crocodile, make sure to research. All right, that's my recommendation to you, inshallah. So we can figure that out. I ran out of time researching, so it could be. All right, insects, vermin, and reptiles. So these are different category. We're not talking about like quadrupeds and these different land animals. These are in their own category, even though they're on land. Not counting sea creatures. So not sea insects and all of that. So insects, vermin, and reptiles. The majority of scholars say that all of these are not allowed. You cannot eat lizard. You cannot eat cockroach. You cannot eat a spider. You cannot eat all of these other things. However, the Maliki school says that they're perfectly fine. Even you may not like it, you may find it disgusting, but just because it's disgusting doesn't mean that it's disliked. And to be honest, just looking at the evidence and everything, I lean towards this opinion, although I would never do it. I have no intention or desire to eat any of these things, but from the evidence perspective, it seems to be a pretty solid opinion. And I'll explain a little bit why. So they're allowed as long as they do not pose a health risk. Now that's very important because today a lot of these insects, they're killed with pesticides and all of that. So you need to be very careful. They're in dirty atmospheres and environments and all of that. You see insects and all of that. So before you eat one of those, you need to make sure it's not going to be bad for your health. Even though most cultures find eating these creatures to be disgusting. Actually, it turns out that they're not most cultures. This happened to be Western culture. 80% of people in the world, or 80% of civilizations or cultures, they actually eat insects and stuff like that. So, interesting statistic. The one exception to the rule has been locusts, which all scholars agree that locusts are okay to eat. Okay, so all scholars say that locusts are the exception to the rule. Imam Malik was saying locusts are not the exception. You just apply analogy and all locusts are okay as well. Okay, so that's the reason. Same thing. So actually a locust is part of the grasshopper family. But there's an interesting thing. An interesting thing is that locusts, according to Jewish law, are also exceptions to the rule. And there's a kosher locust that they also eat. And another interesting thing about locusts is that they travel in swarms, huge, I'm talking millions, sometimes multi-millions of just swarms. And what they do is they come to an area and they just eat up all the greenery. So one of the wisdoms behind this is that once they've eaten all the greenery, imagine someone doesn't have any food left because the greenery is gone, right? So what are they going to eat? They need food. So what are they supposed to eat? They have to eat something. So what are they going to eat? There you go. There's a perfect opportunity for you because these guys ate your food, so you make them food. It makes perfect sense. So alhamdulillah. Yeah. Oh yeah. During the time of the Prophet ﷺ, yeah. It's very clear. Authentic hadith, all schools of thought accept locusts as being an exception to the rule. No. Not only, because what if you're not at wartime and they eat all your food? Okay, so good question. Do the insects that you're eating, or does it need to be slaughtered? How many of you think you could slaughter a locust? So slaughtering the insects or the locusts, actually you do. You do need to slaughter it. But what does slaughter mean? Slaughter means, Imam Malik explained his opinion. He says slaughtering means either puncturing it with like some kind of pin to get it to die, or boiling it so that it dies. Boiling it. Alright, boiling it. So this is the way, so you have to find them alive, otherwise they are considered dead animals. And we're going to talk about dead animals. Okay. So yeah, that's a requirement. Which is good, so that you don't swallow pesticide as well today, in case you were going to be eating locusts. So you have to find them. So that means if you do go to China, you do have to check if these were dead locusts first, or dead grasshopper, or whatever else you're planning on eating, or they were caught alive and then cooked. Or maybe they probably display it live in front of you, and then they probably cook it right there in front of you. Whatever. So the next category is dead animals. Okay, dead animals are prohibited for Muslims to eat, and that refers to any non-sea animal that has flowing blood. So by the way, so those insects, the ones that have blood. Any non-sea animal that has flowing blood, which dies without being slaughtered, is called carrion. Carrion. In the English language, it's called Meta in Arabic. This is prohibited for us. So a cow is allowed for us, right? If the cow gets sick and dies, and then all of a sudden you go and you say, okay, well, let's cut it up and eat it, let's cook it. We're not allowed to eat that. If you're driving down, a mountain or something like that, and you hit a deer, you say, oh, the poor deer died. Let's at least make use of it, and let's try to eat it. You're not allowed to, because it's considered to be a dead animal. So it doesn't matter how it died. If it died a natural death, or it died through an illness, or it died through any of the other means. So some of the means that are mentioned could be naturally, from an illness, from strangling. So somebody came and strangled the animal, that's not slaughtering it. From a violent blow, car comes and hits it, or it falls off a mountain. From a wound, meaning some other animal comes with horns. What's a horned animal? I'm thinking Triceratops, man, but something a little bit more recent. Yeah, a rhino. So a rhino comes and gorges one of the animals, and then it's injured, and then it bleeds to death and it dies. You're not allowed to eat that either. So even though it bled, the blood didn't all come out because it was injured by another animal. So dies from a wound, it's not allowed. This is called dead meat, and we're not allowed to eat it. Now, as long as it's not healthy, as long as it's not unhealthy, you're allowed to do that. Okay? So that's pretty much, otherwise, as long as it's considered to be living, even if it's unconscious, but it's living, and then you slaughter it, you're fine. That's not considered to be dead. But when it's dead, and then there's difference of how you define death, brain death versus heart death and all that. We're going to leave that for another day. But if it's dead before it was slaughtered, it's not allowed. Okay? So once an animal is dead, it's impermissible. There is no way you can make it permissible again. You can recite Surah Yasin over it. You can say Bismillah over as many times as you want. It's not going to be allowed for you to eat it no matter what. Okay? So there's no way to bring it back. Okay? The reason probably for this prohibition is because the blood immediately begins to congeal upon death, and usually it begins to permeate the flesh. So you're going to be having the blood permeating the flesh, and that's going to cause a problem, because especially when we talk about blood, which is the next slide, we're not supposed to be drinking blood either. Okay, so that's the reason for it. Sea creatures, however, are exempt from this ruling as long as there's no health risks involved. Okay, so they're exempt because the fact that they live in water, their blood is a different type of blood, and it somehow maybe it's not mixing with the meat or the water. Salt water is somehow causing it to, whatever happens, Allah knows best the real reason. Scientists could offer some explanation. Probably it would be something interesting, but the exact reason, of course, Allah knows best. So sea creatures are exempt from the ruling. So all land animals must be slaughtered. If they're not, then they're considered dead animals. Blood. Blood is also prohibited. The blood that we're talking about is blood that pours out of an animal after it's slaughtered or after it's injured or something like that. So the blood that actually comes out, that's considered the blood that is prohibited. Okay? The blood that remains in the veins of the animal after it's been slaughtered or something like that, and a little bit of it mixes with the meat, that's considered to be overlooked, because the majority of the blood came out, and whatever little remained, that's considered to be overlooked, so that's not too difficult, because you're never going to get literally 100%, every drop of blood out of an animal. You can't do it. It's not going to happen. Some vast majority, whatever percentage it is going to come out. The little amount that's left, that's considered to be okay. So if you have one of those steaks, and you're like, oh, it's got blood, because it's like a raw or something like that, that's overlooked. Okay? That's the exception to the rule. The reason for not drinking blood might be due to the risk of disease, because blood contains a high amount of uric acid, which is considered to be injurious to human health. So there's reasons behind it, Strangely, I guess I'll mention this story. I actually knew somebody who decided to leave Islam when they found out that they're not allowed to drink blood. Okay? And the reason is because they got into this whole, movement of everything natural, and he had a very, very strong liking for Native American civilization from a political perspective, as well as started liking it just generally. Favorite movie was Avatar. You're getting the point of the profile. What happens is sometimes people, they think that, well then, because these people are doing it, then it must be natural, and blood is natural, and urine is natural. So when he found out that we're not supposed to be drinking blood and urine, and he drinks blood and urine, he really got upset or something like that. The thing is, in the end of the day, even if you can make some kind of counter argument, which I think in this it's very, very difficult to make a good argument, but even if you were, at the end of the day, these type of things, we're giving explanations which do make sense, but if you don't accept that, it's still coming from Allah. And Allah knows best. Our Creator knows best in the end of the day. So we should make sure that we understand that these things are for our own good. These rules are for our own good. Whether we understand that they're for our own good or we don't understand that, they are there for that reason. So that's blood. The next category is intoxicants. So intoxicants refer to basically anything which can intoxicate you, realistically intoxicate you, when you consume it in large amounts. And when that's considered to be an intoxicant, then even consuming it in small amounts is prohibited as well. Okay? So let's take examples like alcoholic beverages. That includes all of them. Beer, wine, whiskey, brandy, vodka, everything. And it also includes drugs. Any type of psychoactive drug. Whether it's a hard drug or a soft drug. Whether it's marijuana or MDMA or methamphetamine or whatever it is. There's a certain thing which impairs your judgment. So intoxication, in this slide here, intoxication means something which impairs your judgment, your ability to think straight. So that's why, from the Islamic perspective, there's no difference between alcohol and drugs. Whereas in Western society or in scientifically, the intoxication, from the word toxic, may not apply to all of these substances. So it's not a scientific, this is an English word, intoxicant. Right? It's not an Arabic word. So we're talking about anything which can impair your ability. Because I get all the time, I get people trying to argue why smoking marijuana should not be prohibited. And these are usually people who are already smoking marijuana. And their arguments usually tell me that they just smoked before they came, because they're not very strong arguments. But anyways, so that's very problematic. So we need to be very clear about that. And we'll talk about medicine. We're getting to the whole medicine and medical marijuana soon. So these are intoxicants. We have to differentiate between intoxicants and alcohol. It's very important for us to understand. So what is alcohol? It's all types of alcohol and beverages. Even a small amount is prohibited. Okay, so rewind. Why is a small amount prohibited? Small amount is prohibited for two reasons. Number one, to prevent somebody from crossing the line. You say, well, I'm just going to take enough so that I don't get intoxicated. I'm just going to drink. I can drink half a can. And I'm a heavy guy. I could drink 1.5 cans of beer and I'm not going to get intoxicated. But many people, right, they go beyond and then they get drunk. Let's say it wasn't many people. Let's say it was 20%. Let's say statistics showed that people who drank in moderate quantities, there was only 5% of them that got drunk. So does that change the ruling at all? No. Why? Because the danger that results from even that 5% is so great in terms of beating up your family and raping some woman at a party or whatever it is. The effects are so bad that even if it was a small amount, it still needs to be cut out from society. That's how bad it is for the person, as well as to restrict access to intoxicants within the society to prevent society from having a problem. And, you know, in a way, alhamdulillah, we can say this is one of the easiest things about Islam to explain to anyone in America. It's really not difficult, unless the person is really adamant. They talk about the whole red wine benefit and all that. Outside of that, when they say, you know what, can you imagine a society where people were not drinking and getting drunk? You talk to most people, they say, yeah, I enjoy drinking in a while, but you're right, benefit-wise, the DUIs that happen, the amount of women that get beat up, the amount of college girls that get raped, during their dates and all of that, lose their virginity, the amount of, all the things that are happening, they know what effect it has upon society. It's one of the easiest things to talk about. So the wisdom it's manifest itself so clearly. So it's, in a way, we say, alhamdulillah, it's a great thing that we see that. Of course, it would be better if it wasn't there, causing problems in our society. So that's that. Alcohol. Okay. Any drink which is begun to ferment. So a drink which started to ferment but cannot cause intoxication in large amounts is not considered to be intoxicating, therefore it's allowed. So you get some type of grape juice and it's going bad, but it's not going to be able to intoxicate you even if you drink the whole bottle. That is considered to be okay. Right? Now alcohol. The problem is that oftentimes people don't understand what alcohol really means. Because alcohol has a colloquial definition and alcohol has a chemical definition. Chemically, alcohol is anything which has a hydroxyl group, OH group. Okay, any chemistry majors? Pharmacy, Evo? Yes, quite a few. So they know this, right? So that's anything which alcohol, and not all of them intoxicate. Not all alcohols intoxicate. So alcohol is found in nature in many places. It's also found in many products. So the question is, you find it in skincare products and all these different products. We're going to talk about food mainly because we covered the other one. So all the food, you find different type of alcohols, liquid alcohols and all of that. So basically, if you look at intoxicating alcohols, if you look at wine or beer or whatever, what is the intoxicating alcohol inside that drink? It's a type of alcohol. Ethanol. All right, ethyl alcohol, ethanol. That's the one that intoxicates you. All right, so that's the alcohol part of the drink, of the beer or the vodka or whatever it is, that's actually going to be intoxicating you. So the alcohol which can intoxicate is prohibited. The alcohol which cannot intoxicate is not prohibited. And when you have the amount of alcohol in another drink, what you have to do is you take the product as a whole. So you take the entire product as a whole. So for example, if you have ethanol mixed into mustard, where would you find this? Yeah, white wine mustard, right? So there's white wine, there's mustard, and inside the white wine there's an amount of ethanol, right? So when you mix all of these together, ratio-wise, the amount of ethanol that exists inside the mustard cannot intoxicate you unless you eat so much mustard, you're probably going to die from mustard overdose before you get intoxicated, right? So the thing is, many scholars have said that any type of intoxicating substance is not only forbidden for you, but it's considered to be an impurity. It's an impurity in the sense that it shouldn't be on your clothing or something like that. Other scholars have said that it's not impure in and of itself, but you're forbidden to be drinking it. And some scholars have differentiated between wine that comes from grapes and all other types of intoxicating substances like beer, which comes from barley, and other rice, wine, or whatever it is. So the thing is, the opinion that I lean towards, and many other modern scholars lean towards, is that if it's not intoxicating in and of itself, yet it contains some level of a substance which, if separated, could have potentially been intoxicating, then it's not considered filth. It's not considered filth. So it's only going to be prohibited for you when it's in a quantity or a mixture that's going to be able to intoxicate you. Therefore, for that reason, the mustard, which can never intoxicate you until you die, right, or they're injecting it in you or something, unless you were to extract the ethanol from the components of the white wine and the mustard somehow and bring them separately, that's going to be allowed, because it cannot intoxicate you in large amounts. So the Prophet said that if it intoxicates you in large amounts, it's forbidden in small amounts. But the mustard cannot intoxicate you even in large amounts, realistically. Therefore, it's not something that's going to be prohibited. So you should always look at ingredients, or you should look at mixtures taken as a whole, all of its parts, if they're combined together. But if they're separated, like an example is, I hear that tiramisu cake has, rum poured over it. So they pour rum on top of it. Now these two things are not mixed. So the rum is on top of the cake, but it's not mixed in and cooked with the cake, such that you could even pour it out, and you could take, like, let's say you had 100 tiramisu cakes and you pour all of them into a cup, right? You get a cup of rum, which could potentially intoxicate you. Therefore, that can actually intoxicate you, because you may not be eating, because it's not mixed together, so you don't have to eat the whole thing. You eat one bite of the tiramisu and you scoop up all the rum, and you do that with all, let's say, 100 plates or something like that. You could probably take 50 bites or something like that. You could get intoxicated. Therefore, that would be taken separately, and it's not allowed. It's prohibited. Are we understanding the general rule? Okay, so that's the general rule. So if it's taken as two separate products, then it would be forbidden for you. When purchasing or possessing a substance, that's the question that you had actually. So when you're purchasing or you're buying something, it's important to differentiate between the two products. Something which can intoxicate you because it's a substance which is used for the purpose of intoxicating, or like rubbing alcohol, okay, which you're buying for medicinal purposes. So the question, like sister asked, was, you want to make your own white wine mustard at home, right? And you say, I found a recipe on YouTube and I'm going to make my own fresh mustard with white wine. So I'm buying the white wine from the store, but it's only to make mustard, and then I'm going to sell it, or I'm going to give it to other people. Are you allowed to do that? No, because you're not allowed to possess or buy that alcoholic substance. It shouldn't be in your house. You're not allowed to pay money for it, all of those things, which we'll talk about in another class. But if it's already been mixed by somebody else, then it's different. Okay? The second thing is substances that you own, like rubbing alcohol, right? It can potentially intoxicate you. But rubbing alcohol is generally not used to get intoxicated on, because of all the other health risks that it has by trying to use it. So they tried it, in America they had the prohibition, the early 1900s. People started using rubbing alcohol to try and get high, right? It was really bad. A lot of people died because of that. It's not something that's generally used to get intoxicated off of. It's not created for that reason, and almost nobody uses it for that reason. So it's okay to possess rubbing alcohol. Otherwise, you could get high off of whiteout. So you can't buy whiteout anymore. No, you're allowed to have whiteout. You just don't get high off of it, because no one really gets high off of it. Nutmeg, and I'm not trying to teach, good thing this is an adult class, right? Some kids are going to go try it, right? I tried it once as well, but not to the level, right? When I was Jahiliyyah days, J days. Nutmeg could potentially intoxicate you. It can intoxicate you, but you have to consume so much nutmeg that you're going to get sick, you're going to have other side effects before you get intoxicated. So actually, in Saudi Arabia today, nutmeg is prohibited. You're not allowed to own nutmeg in its pure form, even in your kitchen. It has to be mixed with other spices at whatever 20-80% level, whatever they have, before you're allowed to possess it. But the reality of the situation is that really almost nobody's, foolish enough to go and try and get high off of nutmeg in reality, right? So therefore, it's okay for you to possess something like that, and that goes along the same example. It applies along the same. No, so what I'm saying is, this is an exception because almost nobody uses it for that reason, and you're going to get so sick, you're going to get so messed up before you get this type of... The intoxication is like a sickness intoxication mixed together. So therefore, since nobody uses it, it really never happens, except in really crazy people or something like that. They're really going to, do this on a regular basis. Then it's something that it doesn't fall in the same category. It's better to avoid, but I mean, if you're a cook or something like that, right, and you really use nutmeg, and no one in your family, your household, your city, your entire state is ever going to use the nutmeg in your house or something like that for getting intoxicated, generally you're going to be okay. If you wanted to stay away, alhamdulillah, you can stay away. So wine is for the purpose of intoxication. You can't buy wine. Ethanol or rubbing alcohol or something that you can use. It's not used to incur intoxication. You're not, okay. The last thing is impure substances. Anything which is impure is considered to be prohibited in Islam. Okay, impure substances are those things which are generally repulsive to human nature, such as blood, feces, urine, vomit, semen, pre-seminal fluid, etc. Right, so these things we were not allowed to eat. The reason why it becomes problematic, particularly in today's society, and this is a fiqh class, so there's no, nothing should prevent us from answering legitimate questions. Okay, one of the things which is becoming very prevalent in today's society is oral sex, and because of that, it's something that needs to be taken into consideration in terms of swallowing or eating one of these substances. So you need to be careful, even though the Shafi'i school is one of the schools of thought which says that semen is actually pure. Generally there's other substances that will come out, so you need to be careful with regards to these things as well. Okay. The next category is harmful substances. So what substances are harmful for you? An animal, for example, which consumes food that is bad. This is a common question because people, these corporations are feeding all this junk to the animals, right? So if it's, let's say they're feeding them back their own feces, or they're feeding them back, something gross or whatever it is, foul food, such that the milk or the meat or something is changing and is becoming impure or something like that, then it could be forbidden. Otherwise, as long as there's no change or the animal is not proven to be harmful for you, it would still be okay. The moment it's considered to be harmful for you, then it's not allowed anymore. So it's depending on the amount of harm that can cause to you. So it could be disliked to eat if it's eating a lot of these substances. Other substances which are prohibited, substances which have no benefit but usually result in great harm, or they have very little benefit but they have so much harm for you, are considered to be prohibited, and these are cigarettes as well as hookah. And I'm pretty sure, I just got an email last week, this also probably would apply to the portable hookah. So the shisha, yeah. So I apologize for breaking all of those people's dreams of doing these things. I apologize to all those Muslim business owners that happen to be doing that, but this is what happened. Some scholars are saying, or quite several scholars still are saying, that cigarettes and hookah, they say across the line, it's makruh, meaning it's disliked but it's not prohibited. The reason why they're saying this is because this is not some new phenomenon actually. Cigarettes have been around for hundreds of years. So the traditional ruling that Muslim scholars have been giving since the 1800s, and maybe even the 1700s, I've seen books from the 1800s, even maybe 1700s and earlier, they've been saying that it's disliked, cigarettes are disliked, tobacco is disliked because of the smell, the foul smell that comes out, and people get harmed by it. So they made analogy with onions and garlic. You're not supposed to be eating and coming inside the masjid and praying because people get harmed and all of that. So they said the same thing, people don't like the smell, it's really bad. So that's why it's disliked. But modern day medical research has proven clearly cigarettes, without a shadow of a doubt, are so harmful for you that they have to be classified and put into the category of prohibited. Hookah was considered to be lesser in nature because it goes through a water filter. Even though the tobacco goes through a water filter, may not contain as many chemicals as the cigarettes. But at the same time, at least from the research that I've come across, they say because of the length of time that you're smoking it for and the regularity and the frequency as well, though cigarettes are more frequent, but they say the length of time, it's just as harmful for you, if not more harmful than cigarettes, despite water filter, which is not doing too much. So as long as that research is correct, hookah will fall into the same category. Right? So we need to be very careful about these things because many Muslims are addicted and we should try to help them get out of it. So it's not to, you have to use wisdom as well. Alhamdulillah, there's this e-cigarette which is helping people to quit. So rather than saying, well, that's also prohibited because it can also harm you, we should try to get people to gradually transition out of it slowly. Okay, so these are prohibited. Now the argument will come, someone will make the argument, well, excess, you can use anything in excess. You can eat a lot of chocolate or you can drink a lot of coffee and that's going to be harmful to your health too. You can breathe, you can live in LA and breathe a lot and therefore the pollution is going to get to you and therefore it's harmful to your health. So why are you telling me? Usually people will make this either for the sake of argument, just for the heck of it, because they want to be clever, or they're actually trying to justify their use of cigarettes or their use of hookah. The reality is, excessive use of a substance which normally doesn't cause harm in small amounts will only be prohibited when you use it in large amounts. Where that's the simple formula and the simple answer to that. But it won't be prohibited in small amounts. Like caffeine, for example. Caffeine can be problematic, right? But that's when it's used in large amounts rather than small amounts. Okay? Transformation and dilution. So, an animal, any prohibited substance, right, that undergoes a complete transformation is considered to be of the latter category after it's been transformed. So, for example, it becomes permissible. So, for example, wine. If you take wine and the wine turns into vinegar, whether it turns naturally by itself or by adding a chemical or by heating it or whatever it is, it's considered to be vinegar now. It's not wine anymore. It's not intoxicating, so it's completely fine. It's clean, as well as it's allowed for you to eat. So this is one thing. Let's take an example. Another example would be, like, how does this work? Because it's something completely different. So let's say you had a plant, and the plant was watered with sewage, right? And you say, oh, that's gross. Yeah, it is gross. But the thing is, what's going to happen is that water is being mixed in with the plant. Eventually, the sewage with the water, with the plant, is going to produce fruit. So now, are you going to say that, well, the fruit is also prohibited now because there was some impurities mixed in? No, it's completely transformed into something else. Fruit and the sewage waste was completely two different things. So now it's transformed over process of growth and all of that. It's considered to be pure, unless, of course, there's clearly, you got an apple that's like smelling really bad or something like that, then obviously you're not going to eat it. But if it's clear that it's changed through whatever processes that took place, it's going to be okay. Classical scholars give an interesting example. They say if a pig falls into a salt mine and turns into salt over time, you can consume that salt. I've been trying to research how does a salt mine do this exactly. It's very hard to find. But salt mines, yeah, it did. It harmed workers who were working in there because there's a salt mine underground where, the salt is there and it's mined out and it's kept and everything. So a very salty environment, it can decompose anything. So if a human or an animal fell in there, the body would completely decompose and everything else just inside the mine would become salt. So if a pig, there's an example for you. So I doubt they did experiments, testing it or something like that, but this is the example that they have. So, a forbidden substance, like a food additive, for example, let's say that's made from pig, or that's made from a lion, or that's made from some animal which is prohibited for you to eat, right? If that food additive is mixed with some other food or something like that, and it's transformed, that food or the impure part has transformed, it's going to be considered to be okay. And there's a lot of food additives like that. So that's transformation. Okay. Then there's something called dilution. Transformation in Arabic is called istihala. This is agreed upon by many scholars, classical scholars. There's something called dilution. Dilution is called istihlak. Okay? This is the principle where a forbidden substance, let's say something from pig or whatever it is, mixes with another substance such that the ratio of the forbidden substance to the lawful substance becomes so minuscule, so small, like less than 0.01% or something along those lines. Right? We're going to talk about a little bit like rennet, for example. Rennet made from cheese or whey or something like that. Then some scholars have said by the principle of istihlak, that it's such a small quantity or ratio, it's considered to be okay, and you can go ahead and avoid that, additive or whatever, and it's okay to consume. Now the reality of the situation is, the principle of istihlak or of dilution was applied by Muslim scholars when it came to filth. Meaning, the example that they used to give is, if you take a drop of urine, and you mix it with a drop of water, are you allowed to make wudu from that water? Because the water has been mixed. Or is that water considered to be impure or not impure? That's kind of an example that they used to give. Now the water itself, their main discussions have always been about the purity of the substance. So if some of that water comes on you, on your clothing or something like that, do you have to wash it off before prayer? As far as I know, and I've been asking a lot of people regarding this, the discussion was never regarding food, because there weren't food additives at that level. No one would come and say like, you know what, I'm going to take that whole chicken or something, I'm going to take one little grain of salt, and I'm going to mix it in there. And this is an impure grain of salt. So now somebody tell me what is the ruling on this product. This was never really an issue in the past. So there's not at least I couldn't find a historical precedent for this. There's a few scholars who are taking this opinion nowadays. And to be honest, I'm in two minds about it. So I'm really not sure. I really haven't made a decision myself. I would say at minimum it's best to avoid it whenever possible. Some respected scholars are saying this. And it would make life a lot easier. But at the same time, I just don't see a historical or classical strong basis for it. So it's still something I'm thinking about and I'm researching. So they say it's allowed to be consumed, and I say it's at least recommended at minimum to avoid it when it's possible. Search for alternatives. And we'll talk about some type of products and ingredients that have that. Okay? This dilution principle is not based upon the hadith about rennet. It's based upon the hadith the principle of a drop of urine going into a big body of water. That's what the modern scholars are saying. So it applies not only to najasa and filth, it also applies to foods. That's what they're saying.
But you don't 100% agree.
I'm not yet convinced yet. So exception of necessity. So the other thing is, there's a necessity exception. So anything which is impermissible for you to eat, when you're starving or you're dying of thirst, you're allowed to eat it or drink it. So if you're dying in the desert for some reason, and let's say a little bit more practical, you're hiking somewhere and you're stuck. Or you're one of those brave people, or perhaps crazy people, or whatever you want to call it. You're one of those people who has this fascination with Mount Everest. And you decide, I'm going to go and I'm going to climb it, or I'm going to do K2 or whatever. And you're climbing out, and all of a sudden you're lost and you're stuck and you're stranded there, and your whole party's gone. They're frozen in ice and they're all dead and everything. You're the only guy left. And all of a sudden some other European backpackers come along, and the only thing they happen to have with them was some extra bacon that they could offer you, and you needed that food. You're dying, you can eat that bacon, and they have some vodka with them, whatever. You can drink that as well in order to survive. But you're only allowed to have as much as needed to survive. So this is not the time to say, I always wanted to have pepperoni pizza. I'm going to eat that whole pizza. No, that's not... obviously, that you could peel the pepperoni off the pizza if you were dying. Right? You could eat the pizza. But you get the point. So there'll be no sin on this person if they do that. So the point is that Allah put this in the Quran Because some people may think that, you know what, it's better for me to die and I'll become a martyr if I die, just starve to death right here. But Allah mentioned this is an exception. You can go ahead and do this. There's no harm, there's nothing wrong with it, and which kind of gives you an indication that there's nothing superior about you sitting there and just dying with, like, you know, something prohibited. There's a lion, let's say, and you could have roasted the lion or whatever, and you're just sitting there looking at the lion, and you know, you're just gonna die there. You know, so that's the reason. No, if there's no other food or drink available, obviously, and only as much you need to survive. So there's no sin on that person. The second category is if you need a certain type of medication, a certain type of medicine, and there's an impermissible ingredient in there. Okay? Either, for example, it has alcohol to the point that it could intoxicate you. Yes, they say, I mean, at least some people say that NyQuil can intoxicate you. It'll get you sick, but it'll also intoxicate you. Or there's gelatin or pork products inside there or whatever it is. Or the classical examples are urine. If there's some urine in there, for example, that's not permissible. So in your medicine or whatever it is, or ethanol or whatever. And in that case, it's allowed with 3 conditions. Okay, you're allowed to take that medicine with 3 conditions. Number 1, there's no alternative medicine available. So let's take a simple example. You want to have your Centrum multivitamin capsule, and that has gelatin, which is made of pork, in it. You say, well, you know, it's for medical purposes and all of that, so let's go ahead and let's just do it. But the thing is, there are so many other multivitamins available. You can go to your local Sprouts and, you know, natural food store and all that, and there you can find ones without that. Number 2, the illness is seriously disrupting your normal life function. We're not talking about you have the flu or something like that, or you have like a common cold, or you have a cough. This is something that's really, really affecting you, and you really need this medicine to help you. So it's causing major problems. And number 3, it's relatively certain that it works. Right? This is not some experimental random thing, or like, you know, just to try it out or whatever. Now this is obviously talking about the ingredients and not actually consuming beer or wine or something else directly. That can never be used as a medicine. Okay? So hopefully that's clear. So these are some exceptions to the rule. So the same thing will apply for painkillers. So let's take morphine, for example. So morphine can intoxicate you, right? It can actually be very addictive as well. But the thing is, if you're in such pain and there's nothing else to alleviate your pain, and it's disrupting your normal life function, there's no other alternative product that can relieve your pain. And of course, the whole medical marijuana would fall under the same category. And there's no other alternative. Those are the 3 conditions that we mentioned. If all 3 conditions apply, then you could also take that. What we'll do, inshallah, then, we'll leave animal slaughter for later, and I'll start answering some of these questions. So we'll leave animal slaughter for next week, and we'll do some of the commonly asked questions about food and drink. Number 1, referring to land animals. What exactly is lard? Okay, lard is pig fat, and pig fat is prohibited. It does not evaporate or transform when you're cooking, so you need to be very careful about lard. So it does not evaporate away, somehow the fat's gone. When you cook it, really, you boil it, whatever it is, it's not going away and it's not transforming. So a common question is, does lard transform because you're heating it and you're adding some chemicals and stuff? No, it's not transforming. Therefore, lard is usually used on like your tortillas, fried foods, yeah? Or some of the bakeries on products can use lard or something. So it's something that we should be aware of. So lard would be prohibited. Number 2, so from land animals, what is gelatin? Right? What exactly is gelatin? Gelatin is a long explanation that I have here. The main question is, does gelatin comes from a pig? And gelatin is basically, it's a protein which is derived from skin of the pig, or it could be from bones. It's hydrolyzed, it's washed, it's melted, it's extracted, it's purified, it's evaporated, it's sterilized, chilled, dried, and then granulated. You're like, wow, look at all of that process. So does it change? Muslim scholars differ, and Muslim scientists differ. And non-Muslim scientists obviously have no opinion because it all depends on what level of transformation has to take place. So, according to one group of Muslim scholars, they say that despite all of that, raw product changing into gelatin with all the chemical pressure and everything, it still retains much of its chemical equation. The collagen triple helix structure is lost. So it loses the triple helix structure, but the resultant gelatin product retains its original coil structure. Therefore, it is not sufficiently transformed. And the other scholars say no, because it lost its triple helix structure, it has sufficiently transformed. So you just have to define what is sufficient transformation. Okay? So scholars do differ on this thing. Of course, in the end, you can always say it's best to avoid it, but at the same time, you can't criticize a scholar who's taking that opinion. Personally, I avoid it. And there's alternatives. So there's beef gelatin alternatives, there's vegetable gelatin alternatives, and now with the whole health food, green movement and everything, it's... Fish gelatin as well, yeah. With the whole movements and green movements and all of that, there's so many, these alternatives are more widely available, actually. Next thing are mono and diglycerides. What are mono and diglycerides? They're in almost all of our products. They are fatty acids, which are usually derived from triglycerides or phospholipids. They're hydrophilic and they're hydrophobic. Basically what that means is, they can be attracted to water or they can repel water. So this is really cool. Water and oil don't mix, right? What if you want water and oil to mix? Some kind of products, you're like, this product, I want to add this ingredient with this ingredient with this ingredient, but they're not sticking together. So what do? Use mono and diglycerides to make them stick together. It makes sense, right? But the problem is, these fatty acids oftentimes come from, they generally come from the skin and bones of animals as well. That's where mono and diglycerides come from. Unfortunately, the most common source is swine. Okay, it happens to be pork, at least from what I've seen. But you can also get it from other animals. You can get it from beef. You can get it from vegetable sources like canola and soy and all of those things. What is the actual proportion of mono and diglycerides in a product compared to the entire product? I don't know. I have not been able to research the entire thing, so that's that. That's the knowledge that you have. The last question is an elephant considered to be a predator due to its tusks, or is it a plant eater? Well, scholars of the Hanafi school traditionally said that the elephant is a predator because it has fangs, and those tusks are fangs. But scientifically, generally, elephants are not carnivores, even though they could probably take out, another creature or something like that. Generally, they're not. Anyone eaten elephant before? Anyone planning on eating elephant in the coming year? So don't worry about it, inshallah. Alright, so those are land animals. Birds. I think elephants are fine, inshallah. Elephants should be fine, inshallah. In case you ever come across that. When we talk about Islamic history, you will find, next class, inshallah, you'll find that the Persians used to use a lot of elephants in their battles. So once you take out a war elephant, big creature, man. You could probably utilize it for food or something. Birds, I have no comment on birds. Sea creatures. Do sea creatures which also live on land need to be slaughtered? Oh, we already talked about that. What about frogs? Okay, some scholars have said that there's a hadith prohibiting the killing of frogs, but other scholars said no, the frogs are exception to the rule. You can eat them as well. So there's difference of opinion. I know the frog leg thing is very popular nowadays or whatever, but probably best to avoid frogs unless it's part of your culture or something. Does fish include shark even though they can eat people? Common question, right? Probably heard it in gatherings and stuff. Yes, fish includes shark, and shark is a sea creature, so even though it has the potential, or it's a carnivore or eats other animals or whatever, it's okay because it's a sea creature. Okay. Next category, insect, vermin, and reptiles. Is it required to slaughter an insect or a reptile? We talked about that. Yes. You pierce it or you boil it, and according to Imam Malik, you have to say Bismillah before slaughtering it as well, even that other animal. Locust, same thing. Cochineal or red number 2 is an ingredient that's in a lot of your candies. So if you're into candy and all of that, it's a very common ingredient, and it's derived from a beetle. So the scholars who say that insects are not allowed, they prohibited this product because it's pigmentation that's collected from the beetle. The scholars that say insects are okay and or dilution, istihlak, causes it to be small amount, then this red number 2 is of less than 1.01% of the product, therefore it's permissible. Moving on. Dead animals. Can we eat the meat of an animal? So we haven't covered slaughter yet, but let's just cover this. Can you eat the meat of an animal that's slaughtered by a Christian who first killed the animal through electrocution and then slaughtered it 30 seconds later? So he came, and this was common. In Spain, for example, Muslim Spain, Christians, sometimes they used to go and they would take a chicken, for example, and they would just choke the chicken and kill it, and it dies. So then, all of a sudden, then you cut it up into pieces. Are you allowed to eat it? No. So if it's already dead, then no. Why is this an important issue? Because modern day corporate farming practices, almost a lot of the meat that comes, they stun and electrocute the animals. And oftentimes, depending on which factory it is, which state you live in, which country you live in, the animals which are electrocuted die before they're being slaughtered. So that becomes very problematic. Okay, so that's an issue. So that's dead animals. So any animal that dies, whether it's in a plant or whatever it is, if the animal dies of electrocution, if it dies of drowning, if it dies before it gets to the slaughterhouse and they cut it up anyways and serve it to you, which is a big problem actually, because they're going to lose money. Imagine some of the animals die while being transported. Right? So what do? They just lose the money. Who's responsible? The guy who sold you the animal, or you now? You just got a bunch of animals that died on the way. That's a big problem. Does American law require that animals be alive when slaughtered? That was my question, which I couldn't find a good answer. According to one activist website, they say, according to meat industry's own statistics, millions of chickens, turkeys, pigs, and cows arrive at the slaughterhouse either dead or too sick or injured to walk, and then somehow they pass these animals off. The thing is, a lot of these like nature, like animal rights websites and stuff, they can be pretty extreme. I mean, like I saw one, they got like the ski masks over like their head and stuff like that. They're infiltrating like different slaughterhouse and stuff. So they're pretty hardcore. So I don't know if their information is very reliable or not. Blood. Eating slightly cooked or raw meat, right? Let's say you go to a steakhouse, halal steakhouse, whatever, and you like your steak raw, and there's some blood in the plate. Allowed or not allowed? It's allowed, right? It's allowed because that blood is coming from where? It's coming from the veins, the blood that remain in the veins, so that's allowed. All right? Intoxicants, so alcohol in food, okay, we already covered that. Vanilla extract. Vanilla extract is something which is used in a lot of food products like ice cream and gelato and other products. It's actually 30% alcohol. 30% alcohol. Is it permissible or is it not permissible? Based on what reasoning? Yeah, if you mix it, right, with the product and it's already mixed with the product, generally I don't think it can intoxicate you. If you somehow all of a sudden try to get, I don't know, intoxicated or drunk from vanilla. There's also artificial vanilla extract. There's also that. So, yes. All right. If wine is cooked properly in food, I heard that it evaporates. I heard that before. So if you go to a restaurant, they're pouring wine and the wine is evaporating. So is that true, first of all? Because if it evaporates, then it's not there. It's almost like transformation, which is istihala. So is that true? No, not really. Because there's actually something called the USDA alcohol burn-off chart. And they actually explain what the timing is. And I didn't write all the details. But basically, even if you cook something in the oven or something for like 2.5 hours, you still get like, I think 10% or 20% of the original product remaining. So the burn-off chart, whether you're boiling or frying or whatever it is not very high. So there's a significant portion that is left. However, it cannot intoxicate you. So what's the best thing to do? So you have two products. You have products which were designed to intoxicate, and you have products which were not designed to intoxicate, like wine and vanilla extract. So if you have wine on this category, it's probably best to try and stay away from that. Even though it may not be 100% prohibited, it may be best to stay away from that. Because mixing in is, some is evaporating, some is mixing, all of that. Vanilla extract, on the other hand, is an example, or not mixed. Or something else, okay? Or nutmeg, right? Or nutmeg, for example, which you have that's being added in there, which is generally not used for intoxication purposes, that would be okay. Okay, without any issues. And you could even buy the product yourself and you can keep it yourself. Okay? It's like rubbing alcohol. You're not going to be drinking it to get intoxicated. That's not, the product is not used for that. Nobody does that, right? So whether or not it could do something before you die or get sick or something like that is generally in a different category. So it depends on how it's made, right? So first of all, it cannot intoxicate you, right? Okay. In a large amount, it's not going to be able to intoxicate you. Number two, how is it made? Was it made originally from white wine, or did they make vinegar from something else and just throw some white wine in there? No, I know. I've read the ingredients. I saw that, and then I've been researching the vinegar and all the different types of vinegars that are made. A lot of them are made with alcohol, but how are they made? Sometimes they're made with some of that, and then it's cooking and it's mixing. So the question is, does it transform or doesn't transform? You know, it's I don't know, to be honest with you, on this one. I would assume that it falls in the category of transformation, though, because the way that it's being cooked and everything, even though they put it in the ingredients, right? Because they're producing the vinegar while mixing the wine is kind of being produced into vinegar at the same time, even though it was added separately. So it pretty much, generally, for the most part, it's going to fall in the category of wine turned into vinegar, because it can intoxicate in the first place. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I'm assuming that it should, but if someone says, well, no, chemically, you can prove that it doesn't, I would say, well, Islamically, generally, the Islamic ruling would be that it falls in the category of transformation, even if it's not chemically transformation, because of the quantity and the inability to intoxicate, and the fact that vinegar can be made from wine. So there's three reasons for this being an exception to the rule. Yeah, no, that's what I'm saying. So that's why this should be okay. That's why it should be okay. But if somebody makes the argument and says, no, vinegar was produced separately. So let's say you have apple cider vinegar with white wine. So you say, well, the vinegar was not made from the white wine. The vinegar was made from the apple cider, and the white wine is something separate. Therefore, you combine the two. You cannot just say that one is all of a sudden okay. Right? So that's someone, if they make that argument, then my other three responses I just gave, which I don't recall anymore, that would be an answer for it. No, you take the product as a whole, because vinegar could potentially come from, be formed from sources of wine. Okay, so hopefully that clarifies that. Okay, so impurity, anyone who believes that a certain type of intoxicant is impure also accepts that it becomes pure through transformation, but not through any other process. This is the issue. This is why you find people you'll find several scholars who say that all these products, no matter what happens to it, unless it transforms, it's not allowed, no matter what, including mustard or something along those lines. Okay, mouthwash. First of all, you're not swallowing the mouthwash. So this is more of a topic of purity, which we covered in the last class. But I'll answer it anyways, inshallah. So mouthwash, can you put mouthwash in there? The mouthwash chemically change. Can mouthwash get you intoxicated? Are you sure? No, let's say there's alcohol mouthwash. No, I know, but let's say you say some college kids, they decide to have a frat party and they want to drink. Could they get drunk off of it? I heard that you can. Can some doctors in the house please comment? You can or can't? I have some people saying you cannot for sure. There's no way. Like pretty sure. Okay, so you die before you get intoxicated. You drown in mouthwash first. Okay, thank you. So the doctors have spoken. So then it's okay. Alhamdulillah, that solves that problem. Yeah. So we discussed that, right? So if they've been fed any type of impurities, as long as the meat has not changed, then it's going to be okay. That's what I was saying. So the principle of dilution has been said by some scholars that if it's less than, okay, you mentioned 2%. Other scholars have different percentage. So some scholars have said that this is a principle that you can apply. That's what they're saying. They're mainly talking about pig. So mono and diglycerides, that's what we're talking about. So again, like I said, I'm divided over that right now. Interestingly, conservative Jews put the ratio at 1/60th. So if anything is less than 1/60th, they will label it kosher. So it's actually not, it doesn't mean that it's 100% free from pork products. So I actually met with the rabbi, and the rabbi told me even some kosher labels, if they're less than 1/60th of the product, it's going to be labeled kosher. What you do is you investigate. You investigate the mono and diglycerides by calling and finding out what's the source. Is it porcine or is it some other type of beef or whatever it is? I'm getting to that. It's all here. So I'm getting to it. Yeah. I think the crab was, as far as I recall researching, the crab was one of the exceptions where it's, even though it can come on land for a while, it's generally a water creature. So they classified it as purely as a water creature. But let me email that to me, inshallah. I'll look into it in more detail. Okay, so we didn't cover all the things about slaughtering and everything. So keep in mind that our test will be from now on in CIS. It will be 2 weeks after this class. So basically, the way it's going to be is that hopefully you're going to be reading the notes, even though you should read before you come to class. If you didn't, you should be reading after class. We're going to continue the slides from this week and answer some of the questions. And then your first test will have all of the material from today as well as the beginning of next week's class. Is that clear? Inshallah. Subhana rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifun wa salamun ala al-mursaleen walhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. Assalamu alaikum.